Okay, so if you clicked on this video, my name is Zach Handy. I'm a licensed practicing counselor with a master's in clinical mental health counseling. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about working with your dreams for personal growth. And the type of dream work I'm going to be talking about is using a Jungian approach for growth. So the info in this presentation is based on Jungian analyst Robert Johnson's book that you see to the left of the screen. It's called Inner Work Using Dreams and Active Imagination for Personal Growth. This is a really great resource and book if you're into doing this type of stuff, so I highly recommend checking it out if you're interested in this. And I used many passages and quotes and summaries from this book, but I didn't want to take the time to continually reference and quote it throughout because that would have just added more work I really didn't want to do. So I want to acknowledge Robert Johnson and his book as my main source for this from the very beginning, so he gets his proper dues and credit. So in this presentation, I'm going to explain the dream work process laid out in his book, and I'm going to use a personal dream of mine throughout to show as an example how to approach each step in this process. Now, before we get into the actual dream work process, we need to start by asking ourselves why we would want to do this type of work in the first place. Why would we be interested in doing inner work and working with our dreams? What benefit does it have? How can it help us? What does it offer us in our personal development? So here are a couple of quotes that I included at the beginning of the presentation from Robert Johnson addressing why this sort of work is significant. In the world of psyche, it is your work rather than your theoretical ideas that builds consciousness. If we go to our own dreams and sincerely work with the symbols that we find there, we generally learn most of what we need to know about ourselves and the meaning of our lives, regardless of how much we know of the psychological theories involved. The point of inner work is to build consciousness. By learning to do your own inner work, you can gain insight into the conflicts and challenges that your life presents. You're able to search the hidden depths of your own unconscious to find the strengths and resources that want to be discovered there. Inner work teaches us one of the most important principles of the path toward the unified self. Many people believe they can achieve unity by going backwards, avoiding the conflict, pretending they aren't there. Inner work as a practical experience shows us that we can embrace the conflict, embrace the duality, bravely place ourselves in the very midst of the warring voices, and find our way through them to the unity that they ultimately express. It is because of the conflict in our own personal lives and our willingness to face them and convert them into constructive dialogue that we grow toward consciousness. So this type of work is invaluable to our capacity to really know ourselves and our inner world more fully. And the more we learn and uncover and understand about ourselves and our inner dynamics, the more freedom and ability we have to reconcile inner conflicts and become more of our authentic selves. This is why this type of work is important. So before beginning this type of dream work, I think it's important to adopt a few views and attitudes that condition how you approach your dreams. And the first one is that dreams have meaning. They aren't random and they aren't nonsensical. They are symbolic representations of inner dynamics in the psyche. They are commentary on your psychic life. Another way to think about this is they are personifying aspects of your inner reality in a dramatized fashion. The second one is that dreams are not rational, and this should be obvious to everyone. The unconscious speaks in metaphors, symbols, and affect or emotional experience, and you must learn its language. So this is foremost important to be able to decipher and understand what your dreams are communicating. It also is key to opening up communication and dialogue between your conscious and unconscious minds. And people make a mistake by interpreting their dreams in a very literal or rational way. And this isn't how the unconscious operates. So you need to know this before beginning this work. And the third one is that what is produced in your dream is first and foremost relevant to you. It is your psyche speaking, and your psyche is not interested in giving you commentary about other people or situations, even if it uses other people from your life and events and situations in the objective world. It is only doing so to represent certain qualities and realities about yourself because of what you associate with those images. So when doing dream work for inner growth, you take the assumption that everything in your dream is showing you something about yourself. So I briefly want to touch on the 4 stages of dream development because knowing this can be helpful in making more clear the idea that your dreams are a commentary on your inner life. They are like a scene from a movie that is representing something about yourself, showing you something about your inner reality. So the first stage involves the persons and places, or the characters, the setting, the stage in which the dream takes place. And what is represented here is the aspects or parts of yourself and emotional landscapes within you. And then the second and third stages involve the statement of the problem and the response to the problem within the dream, the development of the dream, the main theme or storyline of the dream. And one way to look at this is that it is dramatizing some sort of dynamic dilemma, conflict, or relationship within you, often something that you have been going through or are anticipating going through. And sometimes these dynamics are unconscious, so we may not even recognize that what is taking place in a dramatic form in the dream is going on within us unless we consciously concentrate our awareness and become introspective and reflective and examine our inner world. And then the last stage of dream development is the outcome or resolution, or the outcome to the storyline in the dream. So this could represent one of several possible choices that we have to address an internal dilemma, and our dream is reflecting this to us. It may also represent the path we are currently on and how things will end if we stay on the current path, which can be good or bad. Or there may not be a resolution to the dream because it is showing us we have yet to find a resolution or way forward. So it is sort of leaving it open-ended. Okay, so the actual dream work process we're about to get into has 4 distinct steps, and I'm going to get into each one of these steps in more depth as we go along, but just to give you a brief overview. Step 1 focuses on associations, and this is where you are identifying the images in your dream and then finding out what your psyche associates with these images. And this leads into step 2, which is internal dynamics. So this is when you are elaborating on the images and identifying what aspects and dynamics within you these images represent. So you are figuring out what parts of you are being symbolized in the dream. And then step 3 is the interpretation. This is where you're tying together the dynamics being symbolized in the dream and interpreting what this is telling you about your inner world and how this relates to your current reality. This is where you figure out the overall meaning and message of the dream. And then step 4 is the ritual step. And this is where you concretize your takeaway and understanding of the dream and what your psyche is communicating by doing some sort of physical act. And this can be very simple, but this is a way of making the message real and connecting the psychic/spiritual world with the physical. So now what I'm going to do is read you a personal dream of mine, and then I'm going to use this dream to show you how to do this process and how I did it with this specific dream. So this is how my dream begins. I'm looking at my house from the road. It's summer. I see a red truck in the bottom driveway with the feeling that it's mine. I move towards the house and then sense the vehicle has moved. I go into the woods knowing it is there. I find myself in a clearing in the woods and there's a very nice red car parked there. Although not the truck, I feel it's the same vehicle from my house, and I'm not sure who put it there. All of a sudden, a wild, unkempt man grabs me and throws me in the trunk. I'm observing this at the same time as experiencing it. From the observer perspective, I see that the person the wild man threw in the trunk looks like my friend. There are 3 of us now, myself as the observer, the wild man, and my friend in the trunk. I sense that all 3 are somehow me. My friend is banging in the trunk, demanding to be let out. Angry, the wild man wants to get in the car and drive away. I reason with him and tell him this isn't right. He is worried about the retribution he will face if my friend is set free. I'm wanting them to work things out. I'm not totally sure, but either I, the observer, or the wild man that let my friend out of the trunk. He is furious, and I sense that he is calling the authorities against my wishes. The wild man disappears. I am then in the middle of my neighborhood, and my friend is speaking with the police. There are a lot, probably half a dozen or more, and they're walking up the road heading towards my house. They are looking for the wild man to arrest him. I'm against this and dislike what my friend has done. This is where the dream ends. Okay, now I'm going to get into step one of the dream work process, which is the associations. So I'm going to give you a bit of a background on how to approach this step, and then I'm going to show you this step using my personal dream that I just read. So every dream is made up of a series of images. Step one is to discover all the meanings of these dream symbols. You do this by finding out what you associate with the images. So you're going to start by going through your dream and writing down the first image that appears. You're going to make a list of these. And a dream image may be a person, object, situation, color, sound, speech, anything that feels relevant in the dream. And you're going to start by asking, what feelings do I have about this image? What words or ideas come to mind when I look at it? Write down any word, idea, mental picture, feeling, or memory that spontaneously comes into your mind. So you're just free associating and allowing your unconscious to generate the connections. You're not thinking about this very much. And then when trying to decide which associations are relevant at the end, you're going to go with what clicks. Jung said that one of the associations will click and generate a lot of energy in you. So pay attention to what associations stimulate the biggest energetic reaction, because this is going to be a clue as to what the image represents, what meaning it has. So it's also important to know that some images in your dreams may be archetypal, meaning they may embody universal qualities. They may have collective associations that the human race as a whole share. And if you're not familiar with what an archetype is, in Carl Jung's model of the psyche, which is what this sort of dream work is based on, archetypes are inherited structures of the psyche common to the entire human race that shape our perception and apprehension of experience. They are like organs of the psyche. They are systems of psychic energy that become personified in forms and images and have universal meaning to our species. So one way to think about this is just as our biological body is a system of internal structures that harness and use energy to facilitate biological processes, our psyche is also a system based on internal psychic structures that harness and use psychic energy to facilitate psychological processes and experience. So to give you an example, you may have the image of a child in your dream. And on the one hand, the child image is an archetype representing all of the things that a child has meant in the history of the human race. The image of a child has inherent qualities and potential characteristics that we universally recognize across cultures. And the child image can be used by our psyche to symbolize certain psychological processes and realities within us that are inherent to being a human being. For example, the image of the soul child often appears in dreams to represent the core, innocent spark of aliveness in the personality we would know as our soul. And then the child in your dream may also represent something uniquely core to you and have qualities and characteristics you recognize as belonging to your personal experience. So it is both impersonal and personal at the same time. Now, while knowledge of archetypal symbols will be helpful, you do not need to look these up in a book or have previous knowledge. They are inherent to your psyche, and the way in which they manifest are personal to the individual and carry personal messages and meaning. So what's important is deciphering the qualities you feel from them and what their relevance is to your life. The unconscious already knows its own reference to the symbol that it generates. And if you pursue your personal associations to the dream image, eventually the archetypal connections will emerge. Okay, now I'm going to get into my associations from my personal dream. So as you see on the screen, I just made a list of all the images that I identified. Then I went through one by one and just wrote down all of the associations that came up. spontaneously. Remember, you're not thinking about this. You're just letting the connections come up from the unconscious spontaneously and writing them down. So the first image I identified was of the red car / truck and trunk. These things went together for me. So with this image, I associated drive, move, hide, store, flashy, pride, ego. Then we have the image of my house. And with this, I associated home base, foundation, safe, comfort, familiar, peaceful, stable. Then we have the woods, in which I associated wild, unknown, mystery-free, untamed animal, powerful, unconscious. Then we have the image of the neighborhood, which I associated with familiar territory, known routine, relatedness, knowing my place / role, society, collectivity. Then we have the image of the police, which I associated with authority, trouble, guilt, restrain, limiting, controlling. Then we have the image of my friend self, in which I associated persona, old self, fun, masculine, tradition, funny, carefree, party. Then we have the wild / shadow self image, in which I associated slightly disheveled, ex-stepbrother. Don't ask me why, but this is what came up. Anger, aggressive, taking back seat, less seen, neglected. So I want to mention that as you're doing this, writing these associations out, you'll get an understanding, an inner knowing and intuition, what a lot of these images represent internally, what inner dynamics they personify and symbolize from your personality. So this bleeds into step 2, but this is how they flow together. So you'll see that I'm already identifying the wild self as my archetypal shadow. So that's why I have wild / shadow self here, because I know that this is representing an aspect of my shadow. So on the left side, I have the dream ego / observer self as an image. And with this, I associated ego, decision making, organizing, protecting, fair, balance, adult, equanimity. And then I also wrote down the image of the 3 selves, meaning the dream ego / observer self, and then my friend self, and the wild / shadow self. These images were all me. And so it made up sort of like an archetypal trinity. So this is an archetypal symbol, an archetypal image, the 3 selves. So I identified that. And then with this, I associated balance, transcendence, divinity, harmony, and fellowship. So now I'm going to get into step 2. So step 2 is about identifying the inner dynamics within yourself that are being expressed in the dream. So during this step, you are identifying what parts of your personality and inner world are being represented by the images in your dream. So remember, your dream is a dramatization of your internal reality. So it is symbolizing an inner organization of parts of yourself and how they behave and interact. So during this step, you are going to connect the dream to what is going on inside you. You are identifying the parts of your inner self that appear as the images in the dream. So start off with the question, what part of me or what inner dynamic does each image refer to? For each image, ask, what part of me is that? Where have I seen it functioning in my life lately? Where do I see that same trait in my personality? Who is it inside me who feels like that or behaves like that? And then write down each example describing how the inner part of you has been expressing itself in your life. So approach the dream like it is showing you an attitude, conflict, belief, or value about yourself. Again, assume that the dream is a commentary on your inner life. No matter what people, things, or situations are in your dream, assume that they are there to show you something about yourself. So your unconscious psyche will borrow images from external situations and people to represent certain qualities within you. So because you associate certain qualities, characteristics, dynamics with these people, things, situations, your psyche is going to use those to represent something about yourself to yourself. So think of each person in your dreams as one of the autonomous personalities that coexist within your psyche and combine to make up your total self. So when trying to under what a person in your dream is representing about you, ask yourself, what are the main characteristics of this person in the dream? How would you describe his character and personality? Where do you find the same traits in you? And this will lead you to discover what they are representing about your inner world. Also, dreams often tell you about beliefs, attitudes, and values you hold that are unconscious and have been repressed and not incorporated into a healthy balance of your conscious personality. And because of this, dreams will often speak in extremes to compensate for a lack of awareness of equality by picturing it in extreme, dramatic imagery. So, this is another reason to be careful about not interpreting your dreams in a literal fashion, because oftentimes there are things shown in a very dramatic way because your psyche is trying to grab your attention and say you need to focus on this or become aware of this thing you have not been paying attention to or paying enough attention to. So it's also important to pay attention to the images that aren't people. Places, buildings, animals, colors, numbers, objects, geometric symbols, all these things can be representative of something in your inner life. For example, a place may represent an emotional environment, a set of circumstances, or a sphere of influence. So you want to pay attention to all of the aspects of your dreams and ask yourself what could be a relevant image and what aspects have significance for the dream. And typically you will have a pretty good intuition for this. So you'll notice in the dream that I shared, I identified several things that weren't people, like my home, the neighborhood, the woods, the number 3. So now I'm going to get into the inner dynamic step of my personal dream and give you an example of how to do this. So working off the associations that I came up with for the images in the first step, I then started working out what is being represented about myself with each image. So I wrote them all down again and then went through one by one. And I started by asking myself, what aspect of myself is being represented here? What is being symbolized about my inner personality? What inner dynamics and qualities are being shown and represented with this image? So starting with the red car/truck and trunk, I determined that this was representative of my persona, how I want to portray myself to the world, prideful, the character my ego uses to drive around in. The image shifts between a car and truck, representing how I shift between different aspects of my personality, depending on the situation, people I'm around, and role I'm playing. The trunk is symbolic of how I can repress or suppress aspects of myself underneath this egoic layer of my personality. Then next, moving on to the image of the woods. This was representative of the deeper layer of my psyche, my unconscious. Also the realm where all aspects of my personality, conscious and unconscious, collide and interact, a battlefield of sorts, an internal meeting place. And this is also an archetypal image because your unconscious realm is often depicted in dreams by forests, wooded areas, bodies of water, underground areas, places that are mysterious and unknown and wild. Then moving on to the image of my home, this is symbolic of the conscious parts of my personality that I know, what I am aware of about myself, what and who I am familiar and comfortable with being, what I have adopted from family, societal, and cultural norms, the characteristics and behaviors I embody consciously that bring stability to my sense of self, the conditioned part of my personality, where I like to stay, the comfort zone of my personality. So I hope this is starting to make a little bit of sense, and a lot of this just will come naturally as you sit down and start writing this out. Now moving on to the image of my neighborhood, this was representative of the societal ecosystem I live in, the regular parts of, and the situations in society that I interact with. It represents the different roles I play with friends, work, family, etc., the different parts and characteristics of my personality I am familiar with embodying socially, the social environment that influences how I act. And so this could also be an archetypal image of the Freudian superego, the part of my ego that has been conditioned by social standards and ethics that I have learned through my upbringing and culture, and that determines what behavior I feel is socially acceptable. So moving on to the image of my friend self, I started off by asking, what part of me feels similar or functions in my life in a way that feels like this image? When I think of this friend, I think of parts of my life where I feel carefree and youthful, someone who just wants to have fun and party. This relates to an inner personality of mine, one that I have identified with since a teenager, a part that likes attention and wants to be liked, a part that is hedonistic, also a part that is immature and irresponsible. He is thrown in the trunk because my shadow self wants me to stop over identifying with that part of my personality. And moving on to the wild man slash shadow self. So I know this symbolizes my archetypal shadow self. It appears unkempt and primal. It is aggressive and almost desperate. It is representative of inner qualities that have been neglected, unacknowledged, and banished to the unconscious, which are the qualities that make something a part of your shadow. Most people have probably heard of shadow work or your shadow self, which is essentially aspects of you that are unincorporated into your conscious personality that you do not see or that you repress and don't want to acknowledge, which is why it must lure my ego into the wilderness where it fights to have its place. It represents aspects that want to be incorporated into my conscious personality but have not gotten the chance. It throws my friend in the trunk and hopes it will get its chance to emerge if this other aspect of my personality is subverted. It symbolizes unactualized characteristics within me. And then moving on to the image of my third self or the dream ego slash observing self. So this is my dream ego that is the center of my awareness slash subjective identity. I believe this is also partly identified with my archetypal self, which is the center of my personality. It is the part of me attempting to bring balance and harmony to all of my inner parts. It lets my friend out of the trunk because it knows the infighting is foolish and that every part needs their say and has their place. It wants development and evolution. It is seeking to end internal conflict. It synthesizes my personality. It is the most mature part of who I am. Now, the image of the police. So in my dream, they are recruited by my friend self to bring punishment to the shadow self. I feel they represent the boundaries my ego puts around my identity of who I am. They are defense mechanisms of sorts, employed by my ego to keep unconscious forces at bay. They are what repress and suppress inner parts that have not been yet able to be incorporated into my conscious personality. Every time these inner parts of me want to come out and be seen, these police fight to keep them hidden. This is done through denial, judgments, fears, and stories I tell myself. They want to maintain a specific image of who I am to others. These forces within me are trying to keep me identified with the friend personality because it is safe and known. They are parts of the superego, and this is why they appear in the neighborhood. Now, moving on to the image of the three selves. So, three is the archetypal symbol for transcending duality. This means there are two opposites that are merged, and conflict or death is overcome by being raised to a new perspective, an overarching unity. In my dream, three selves being present means that I am needing to merge opposing aspects in myself into a whole, and through this unity, internal conflict will be transcended. The friend self and the shadow self are doing battle currently in my life, jockeying for position, and my central self is trying to bring them into a balanced relationship, to make them aware they are a part of a wholeness so that they can coexist. So moving on to step 3 of the dream work process, which is the interpretation stage. The interpretation ties together all the meanings you have drawn from the dream into one unified picture. So this step should flow out of the first two, and it's where you are connecting the associations and dynamics. So some of the questions to ask during this stage that will guide you through this part are: what is the central most important message that this dream is trying to communicate to me? What is it advising me to do? What is the overall meaning of the dream for my life? What is the single most important insight that the dream is trying to get across to me? And don't always expect the interpretation to come out in a coherent form on the first try. Keep writing down your ideas about how you think the dream fits together and the meaning it has until it fits within the overall pattern of the dream. An adequate interpretation should always provide a specific application of the dream message to your personal life, what you are doing, and how you're going to live. And this is the most important thing, is that you are getting a specific message to apply to your life. How are you going to apply what the dream is telling you to your life currently? So sometimes you may come up with multiple interpretations and you have trouble deciding which one you should go with, which one is correct. So here are a couple things to follow to help you determine how to choose between different interpretations when this is a challenge. So when choosing between alternatives, you can help decipher this decision by writing them down. When you write the interpretations out, you'll be able to see it more clearly and feel which one clicks and which one has holes in it. So you're being guided by your feeling towards the interpretation. You also want to make sure that you are following small cues in the dream. Every mystery has tiny clues that lead to the solution. Pay attention to small details and try to read what they are saying. Notice subtle feelings during parts of the dream. Also, you always want to try to determine the energy intensity of the interpretation. A good test for interpretation is whether it has energy behind it. If it arouses strong feelings, gives you sudden insight into your life, if you suddenly think of other areas of life where this interpretation makes sense, if it offers insights and liberates you from patterns you've been stuck in, these are signs there is strong energy behind the interpretation. And again, writing it out can help you determine how strong the energy is. And then finally, you can also argue from opposites like a lawyer. So if the interpretation still is not becoming clear and you can't decide between different interpretations, you can try playing devil's advocate with each interpretation of the dream and argue each point of view like a lawyer. And sometimes there may not be a right choice. There may not be one specific interpretation that you are supposed to follow. The dream may be telling you that you can take either path and what the consequences will be for what you choose. For instance, it may be telling you that you should take a certain attitude towards life, but if you don't and persist in the other attitude, these are the consequences that follow. So it's your psyche trying to relay to you the path you are on and what that path looks like. So now I'm going to touch on 4 principles for validating interpretations. So these 4 principles, if you follow them, you can be reassured that the interpretation you do choose to pay attention to is the one that your psyche wants you to focus on. So number 1, choose an interpretation that shows you something you didn't know. Opt for the interpretation that teaches you something new. The main function of a dream is to communicate something that you don't know, that you are unaware of, that lives in the unconscious. However, the exception is that sometimes your dreams will send you the same message over and over because you are not understanding or putting it into practice. So it may send you the same dream or dream theme over and over again, because it's wanting you to understand this is something you need to be aware of and pay attention to. Number 2, avoid the interpretation that inflates your ego or is self-congratulatory. Dreams do not report things in a way that invite egotistical satisfaction. They do not invite us into ego inflation. They are aimed at unfinished business, what you need to face next, and what you need to learn. If you find yourself writing a self-congratulatory interpretation of a dream, understand that's probably not very accurate. And remember, we are doing dream work for personal growth, for personal development. That is the purpose here. So if your dream is not helping you grow in this way, then you are not doing the dream work. 3, avoid interpretations that shift responsibility away from yourself. Beware of interpretations that feed your self-serving tendency to shift the blame and focus to others. Your dreams are not concerned with the faults of other people. Your dreams are concerned with what is going on inside you and the invisible energies that are shaping your inner path. 4, Learn to live with dreams over time. Fit them into the long-term flow of your life. Often a dream can be understood in the context of recent events, but sometimes your dream is showing you a panoramic view of your inner development over a longer period of time. It is showing you a blueprint of your development. It contains meaningful dynamics of the past, the present, and the seeds of your future self. Sometimes it is showing you where you're heading. If you honestly still cannot choose one definite interpretation of your dream, just live with the ambiguity of it and continue returning to the symbols and images. With more time and experience, it will become clear. So sometimes you may not be ready to understand what the dream is telling you, but it's planting the seeds for you to come back to. Okay, now I'm going to get into the interpretation of my personal dream. And to start this off, the questions that I asked that guided me into this was, what is the overall message? What is the dream communicating to me about myself? I feel this dream is a commentary on a process I am currently engaged in and one that I need to continue for the development of my personality. It is telling me that there is a tension between my friend self that my ego over-identifies with and who I need to be in order to grow. I've been over-identifying with this part of myself, and it is suppressing other aspects of myself from being present in my daily life. This has especially been the case the last several years after I moved back to my hometown. There are inner parts of myself that want to make themselves known, embodied, and become a part of my conscious identity. For too long, I have driven around with this persona whose main focus is having a good time, being carefree, and being liked. But this part of me is also irresponsible and immature, holding me back from allowing deeper parts of myself to be known and present. The dream states the problem being addressed by showing the contrast between my friend self and shadow self, and how they don't get along. The shadow self appears when the truck is driven into the wilderness. It is not a part of the home or the neighborhood. There is opposition present between my friend self and the shadow self, a conflict. This conflict develops in my dream by my unkempt shadow self shoving my friend self into the trunk of the vehicle. It is tired of not being seen, and this act is the only way it knows how to be known. It feels it must keep that side of me from being the center of my ego personality, because when it is, it banishes other parts to the shadowy unconscious. So what qualities does the shadow figure represent in me? This I am not totally sure of. I think it is safe to say that it represents qualities opposite of what my friend self represents. Maybe more introverted, less superficial, concerned about deeper aspects of life, more spiritual, less hedonistic. Part of me that is concerned with personal growth, development, and wisdom. It is a part of me that is more mature and desires more responsibility in the real world. In a way, it seems like the friend aspect of my personality is a less developed masculine form, and the shadow aspect represents a more developed masculine form of myself. It is like this dream is a commentary on a transition phase I am having from the immature masculine to the mature. In order for this transition to be successful, I have to give up ways of living that are more irresponsible and immature. The conflict is also highlighted when my friend self goes and recruits police to get retribution against my shadow self. These are defensive structures, all of the insecurities, judgments, complexes within me that have been socially conditioned to keep me from expressing certain parts of myself out of fear. They tell me that it is only acceptable to be certain parts of myself around others. This is why they enter through the neighborhood, because my neighborhood represents the social ecosystem that I live in. It represents all these social interactions that I have. It is no coincidence then that this dream occurred during a time that I had given up drinking and going out. I've been spending more time reading, learning, and being health focused, more concerned with my professional development. My dream is telling me that this needs to continue. It is saying that in order to resolve the dynamic of this internal conflict, I need to make voluntary choices that allow this deeper shadow aspect to be more present in my personality. In my dream, my central self responds to the conflict as it does because it knows that I cannot let this back and forth battle continue in my unconscious. This is the wisest part of me that wants to bring synthesis and harmony to my inner world. It knows that both aspects, my friend self and shadow self, deserve to have their place. It knows that my personality can be made up of all the qualities and characteristics of my friend self and shadow self without there being conflict. And in order to bring this balance, though, I have to make more space in my life for the qualities and characteristics of my shadow self and reel in the qualities and characteristics of my friend self so they are not so out of balance. This is the resolution to my problem. This is how I obtain the growth that is needed by my psyche. Now, moving on to the final step. This is the ritual step. So this step requires a physical act that will affirm the message of the dream. It may be a practical act or a symbolic act, a ritual that brings home the meaning of the dream in a powerful way. This step is important because you're taking the dream from the abstract realm and bringing it into the physical. This is what makes the dream message become real. It is how you connect the unconscious realm with the conscious. It facilitates communication between them. It is giving the dream an immediate, concrete reality. It is imprinting the unconscious into objective reality. In this way, the conscious mind sends a message back to the unconscious. Hey, I understand. I see what you're saying. I'm working with you. The role of ritual and the growth of consciousness is related to its power to make symbolic experience into something physical and concrete. We go beyond understanding the meaning of symbols with just our minds when we feel the symbols with our bodies and our feelings. One way to think of it is that it makes the energy of the unconscious real in our nervous system. It allows us to join the conscious and unconscious in an integrated way. The physical act does not need to be anything major. Usually small and subtle acts are the most potent. The important thing is that you are taking time and space to honor the dream. Go with whatever feels relevant when it comes to choosing a ritual to concretize the dream. So, for examples, write a letter to an inner part of yourself from the dream and mail it to yourself. Take something from the dream, such as flowers, and release it into a body of water. Go for a walk or a drive to a location that feels relevant to the dream. Draw or color a picture. If you can't think of anything, then just do anything. Don't overthink it. Go walk around the block in honor of your dream. Light a candle. Any physical act will do as long as you are linking that act to the dream. So in my personal dream, the ritual that I did, I simply went down to the very edge of my driveway where it meets the woods, or the road by my driveway where it meets the woods. And I simply imagined my shadow self in those woods, and I embraced it. I welcomed it in. I invited it to join me, to become more of a part of me. And this was the simplicity of the ritual. It only took a couple minutes, and this was the way that I linked what I had learned in the dream. Okay, so we went through the whole dream work process using a Jungian approach, again, based on Robert Johnson's book, Inner Work, Using Dreams and Active Imagination for Personal Growth. So if you're interested in working with dreams, I hope that you got something out of this. I highly recommend getting this book by Robert Johnson as well, if this is the type of work you want to do. And thanks for watching.